All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our roundtable discussion brought to you by the Foundation for Excellence in Education, ExcelinEd. First, we'll start with tips for engagement. To get the most out of this experience today, all of our participants will be in listen-only mode. Post any questions to the panelists in the Q&A box that's going to be below. And utilize the chat feature to share resources or to comment when topics are discussed that are relevant to you. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available no later than Friday. And at the conclusion of the webinar, an evaluation link will be sent to all attendees. For those of you who are not familiar with the Foundation for Excellence in Education, we are a 501c3 organization that supports state leaders in transforming education to unlock opportunity and lifelong success for each and every child. We focus on quality, which houses early literacy. We also focus on opportunity and innovation. Our board is led by President and Chairman, former Governor Jeb Bush. With a deliberate focus on reading by third grade and utilizing our best practices that are grounded in the science of reading, ExcelinEd has engaged with over a dozen states to pass and or assist with implementing third grade reading policies. Many of these policies place accountability at the end of third grade, which is usually measured by an end of year assessment. So with the COVID-19 disruption, summer learning loss, and without an end of year assessment, how do we prepare and support our fourth grade teachers specifically and their students as we begin to reopen our states and schools? Today, we have an experienced panel joining us to discuss this very timely topic. First, we have Ron Fairchild, who currently serves as the president and CEO of the Smarter Learning Group, which is a national consulting firm focused on helping education-related organizations achieve better results, stronger partnerships, and attract more investment. And that also serves as the director of the Grade Level Reading Support Center, which functions as a hub for peer exchange, a broker of tools and technical assistance, and an accelerator of the scope and pace of change in the more than 300 communities in 45 US states that are currently involved in the campaign for grade level reading. He is also a former public school teacher who holds a BA and master's degree from Vanderbilt. Thank you for joining us, Ron. Anji
You're welcome. Thank you, Camilla.
You're welcome. Anji Gallanos serves as the director of preschool through third grade office for the Colorado Department of Education. The P3 office at the Colorado Department of Ed houses collaborative initiatives that support districts with preschool through third grade implementation, including the Colorado Preschool Program, Preschool Special Education, Kindergarten School Readiness, and the K-3 Reading Initiative in Colorado, which is called the READ Act. Prior to coming to Colorado, Anji worked for the Alaska Department of Education, overseeing the literacy standards implementation in early childhood education. Anji has also served as a preschool and K-3 special education teacher and a reading specialist throughout Alaska. Thank you so much for joining us, Anji. Laurie Lee is currently an associate in research at the Florida Center for Reading Research, where she works to support literacy for grades pre-K through 12 and assists with adult education projects in Florida and other southeastern states. She most recently served as the Deputy Director of the Just Read Florida office at the Florida DOE, where she provided technical support and professional development to schools and districts across the state. Prior to joining the FDOE, Ms. Lee was an elementary and middle grades teacher in Missouri, Mississippi, and Illinois. Thank you for joining us, Laurie. And Kevin Smith, currently a senior research associate at the Florida Center for Reading Research, where he works on literacy, career readiness, and adult education projects in Florida and other southeastern states. He is formerly the Deputy and Acting Director of the Just Read Florida office at the Florida DOE, where he provided extensive technical support to schools and districts across the state. Prior to joining the FDOE, Mr. Smith was a middle and high school literacy coach and teacher of English, journalism, technology, and reading intervention. Welcome, Kevin, and thank you all so much for joining. I thought it was just extremely important to add that each of you have been teachers, and that you can feel our pain as we prepare and plan for what needs to happen in order to make sure that students, families, and teachers are ready this fall. All right, so our session outcomes will discuss the impact that COVID-19 is going to have on beginning of year reading readiness, particularly on 4th grade. We'll also look at some considerations for training, curriculum, and also collecting data in anticipation of what the fall will look like. And we will discuss some practical strategies for districts, schools, and communities in preparation for summer and fall school reopenings. Okay, so I'll begin with a little context for summer learning loss. Traditionally, summer has been the time, as it says, research spanning over 100 years, that we've talked about this summer learning loss, which is particularly acute among our low-income students. This is a time where usually there's no learning taking place, no structured learning at least, and students who may have tested at a certain grade equivalent at the end of the year, by the beginning of the year, they've lost some of that when they have their beginning of year screeners or beginning of year assessments. So I'll start with our first question, which is really our essential question. What are the implications of the COVID slide on our 4th graders being ready to read to learn? We know that this is a milestone, an important milestone, transitioning from 3rd grade to 4th grade, from learning to read to reading to learn. So what will be the implications for this? And I do want to start with you, Kevin.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kimiana. And what I'll start with is just the fact that we don't know statewide, certainly, or across the nation exactly what experiences students are having now and what they're going to have over the summer. So typically we'd have outcome measures, we'd have some more data on student performance that would be able to interpret and help understand what needs students have. As you've mentioned, there might be more summer learning opportunities than we're likely to see this summer, just based on the difficulty we're going to find in getting people together face-to-face or offering online support for students. So there really are some significant implications. Just the type of instruction students had at the end of the year is very different than what we've seen. And what I'll say too is just the social and emotional aspect of this for students, for families, for everyone is going to be important too. I think as we start working over the summer and into the school year, we're going to have to really focus on relationship building. We, in general, not just students, but us, everyone's been apart from a lot of people for a while. So we'll have to really think about what that looks like to bring students back together in groups. And it's just going to be, there are challenges that we don't even know yet, but I think they're overcomable. There are things certainly that we can do to address, but I do think it's important to start thinking about some of those things now.
Okay. Laurie, would you like to add to that?
Sure. And thanks for the opportunity to be here today, Kimiana. Sure. The one thing that really comes to mind is the fact that we know that we're going to have students that are moving from 3rd to 4th grade that perhaps are not ready for that. We would have had, again, Kevin mentioned those outcome measures. Our states would have given assessments. We would have had students participating in summer reading camps that were falling, at a level that was below proficient when it came to reading. And we know that that may happen, it may not, but we know that regardless, many states are promoting everyone. And so we have, in essence, a large-scale social promotion. And so knowing that because of this situation, we'll have at least some students enter 4th grade that aren't ready to be there. And so we're going to have to ensure that our 4th grade teachers have access to professional development, that they have some skill in reaching back and teaching some of those foundational reading skills, because we know we will have a population of students that have not mastered those.
Yes. And so I will move on to our first question for summer prep. And Angie, this question will be directed to you to begin. So as we know, planning for summer must start now. New Hampshire has convened a school transition reopening and redesign task force. And so admittedly, the education commissioner actually stated, we've got a task force that's trying to solve a problem, but we don't know what we're actually solving. And I think that we're all in that space right now. So what guidance should state agencies provide to districts on summer learning and or preparation for reopening in the fall? And with that, what challenges may state agencies face in planning for the unknown?
Thanks. Thank you, Kimiana. That's a big question.
Yeah.
I want to kind of jump back to the essential question, because when we imagined this question and really thought about it, we wanted to be really intentional within our own office and careful about the way that we frame the idea of loss or COVID loss, because what we are seeing, what we've always seen, is that our children are already going into schools with academic disparities and delays. And it framed it, we wanted to be cautious about the way that we framed this and saying that, you may have been making progress, but due to COVID, now you're not. Now we have to be really cautious about saying, we've always known this was an issue. COVID magnified this. So when we think about our guidance, the first thing that we've been doing as a state is really being intentional about our language and the way that we work with our districts and the way that we're intentional about listening to what districts need first from us. When I talked to my team about this, and I really said, well, what guidance do state agencies provide to districts? The first thing that came out resoundingly is, how are we listening to what is being said in the field? How are we being in tune with understanding what those needs are? Because to be honest, we may be too late with guidance. And I'm not sure that can be our role right in this moment to provide guidance. It infers that we're trying to get out ahead of something that is already in front of us. What we know we need to do now is listen to the unique needs that each and every one of our districts have. Really identify that things may be different, that guidance might include for some districts a complete reimagining and restructuring of their school calendar, or reimagining the way that they provide off-site instruction. So, but because of some of like the compounding issues that I said, each of our districts are very different in the way that they approach things. We're seeing exacerbated differences between rural and urban students that were always there, but may be more exaggerated now. And like I said, I know that the approach that we're taking is to no longer think that we have to get in front of something and realize that maybe our approach needs to be listening and thinking about the way that we support our districts to be really in tune with the needs of parents and families and children that they're working with, and supporting those districts to implement practices that are really parent friendly and community friendly, so that they can start approaching their parents and their families as their customers and assure that they are providing the supports that they need. I will say that Colorado did release guidance as a toolkit. We just put that out this last day or so. And what that was framed on was really about the requirements for going back to school, if it shall happen that way. The document is really broken down into a number of different approaches, including remote learning, in-person learning, physically distancing, rolling starts and stops, because as a state with 178 districts, it's really difficult for us to come up with one general piece of guidance because everybody is different. So again, I go back to the idea of listening, imparting the importance of listening to families and parents within those communities, and then making sure that we're in a situation where we are always listening and always in tune with the needs of our consumers.
Thank you, Angie. Ron, so with a lot of your work in the communities and of course, working in states just all across the country, what are you hearing as it relates to our communities, and are they anticipating guidance, or do they believe that this is the time where states should hear from them as to what their needs are, instead of, as Angie stated, not giving a blanket approach to how all school districts should operate?
Well, let me just say thank you, Kimiana, for including me in the conversation. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. And also wanted to just share, just to begin with, just how deeply inspired and impressed I am as we work with communities all across the country in the way that teachers and leaders and funders in local communities are really stepping up and innovating, inventing, and in many ways improvising with the realities that they're facing. I too want to go back to the essential question as well, and just say that I think it's fair to say that there is an urgent need, both at the community and the state level, to focus on reversing what is potentially a catastrophic amount of learning loss experienced by large numbers of young people who will have not derived the full benefit from the remote learning that's been available. And we know that that learning loss is real, and that COVID slide is real. The NWEA report recently provided some pretty powerful estimates of that, and also reinforced by earlier findings even before this from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine that talk about the impact of summer and then what could mitigate that learning loss in the form of high quality after school summer expanded learning opportunities. So I see communities really leaning into this challenge around the learning loss issue. I also see a lot of communities, hear from a lot of communities who are very concerned about the number of kids who are going to be entering the 2020 school year without having the benefit of a full school year, without having the benefit of a full year of Head Start or pre-K. We know that the impact of these setbacks are going to be felt most profoundly by our youngest and most vulnerable students, and already concerns I'm hearing in communities about kindergarten enrollment projections, for example, being well below what they would anticipate this same time in a normal year, and the prospects of parents redshirting their kids in kindergarten and other types of things like that. So I also just think that communities are really looking for guidance about how to best support parents during this time as well, and embrace parents as the essential partners they are in learning. And so those are some of the areas I think that are ripe for potential guidance, and I think there's opportunity for listening and learning that go in all directions associated with the current crisis and challenge that we're all facing.
Thank you so much. Kevin and Lori, with your work with the Florida Center for Reading Research, we know that many states look to Florida for guidance on or innovative ideas as to how to implement certain things. So what guidance do you believe state agencies should provide as it relates to summer learning or reopening in the fall?
I'm going to piggyback on something that Angie said, whereas definitely listening at this point is really important. Also promoting networking. So when you hear good ideas, when you hear things from districts or needs that they have, and hear other districts or states, and that's one of the purposes for the webinar, if you hear those ideas, make sure that you know that the district staff have a way to network with others and to hear those ideas and to share among themselves what's working well, what challenges they expect to face. I think that's a really important part of this, is to make sure that you, again, connect people who might be able to help each other. Because there are definitely, every district, as was mentioned, between rural, suburban, urban, there are different needs across. And yet there are some similar needs and some approaches that might be helpful to share with similar groups. So I just wanted to mention that maybe another step to take is just promoting those state organizations that may be out there for networking, to really lean on the organizations and folks who are in place to help support those ideas and spread them. Because there are some great ideas that I've already heard and seen out there. It's just getting those shared and finding ways to make sure that everyone hears about them and knows how to do them.
And I agree with Kevin. I think communication is really, really important. And everybody is so focused on what they need to do themselves right now that if the departments, our state departments and other professional organizations can really get out there and provide a means of really sharing with one another, that's really, really helpful. And then I do think also just some reassurance that yes, things are crazy. We're all kind of, I've heard it said, and you probably have too, we're all in the same storm. We're not in the same boat. We know that. But we do know our kids. And this isn't, we are where we are, but it's not like we don't have any data. So we do know about our students. We know that this has exasperated some of the disparities that we already knew were out there, absolutely. But I think just a word of encouragement, that word of, okay, let's just take a breath. And there are things that we can do to help. And we do know where a lot of these kids are in regard to their reading abilities, their academic kinds of performance. And so we can move forward.
Okay, so as you all know, some parents, especially through social media, they've expressed just being stressed out during this time, especially now with their new role of homeschool teacher, right? So as we move into the summer, should schools or districts encourage parents to continue to provide some type of learning opportunity to their children, whether it's structured or unstructured? Have some parents just had enough? You know, there were schedules being passed around like, these are things that you could do. And some parents were like, you know, I'm just trying to survive right now. I'm just trying to feed these children who want to eat all times of day, or, you know, just really, as a parent now, understanding some things about your child's learning and that there are some things that they are struggling with, you know. So should we encourage them to continue some sort of learning over the summer?
I would say a resounding yes. And again, providing parents with that reassurance, while it would be great if there were some structured opportunities, they don't all have to be that way. And just incorporating learning into your daily life is really possible and not that difficult to do. When we think especially about literacy, we know how important oral language is when it comes to learning to read. Just talking to your kids, reading them those bedtime stories, doing those kinds of things that don't take a lot of time, but make a huge difference when it comes to building vocabulary and conceptual knowledge and background and all those things that are really important to learning to read. So absolutely, there are things that parents can do that are low stress. In fact, the Regional Educational Laboratory Southeast has recently put together a website that contains parent resources for grades kindergarten. They're now to grade 2. And these are activities that, again, are just really easy for parents that they can incorporate into their daily life. There are videos there that show what those look like being used by real families. And so I think, again, if we can just encourage our parents and let them know that this, you know, we're not talking about structured school from 9 to 3, but we're talking about incorporating deliberately some activities into your daily life as you engage in those activities throughout the days and weeks. Kimiana, you're on mute.
Yeah. All right, Angie, what are you thinking when you hear the resounding yes? What are some ways, or what are resources that we can provide, as Laurie stated, that are intentional and to allow parents to see, well, these are ways in which you can do these things, which are low stress, but which are necessary.
I also have a resounding yes. And I would say that we should never have changed the way that we focus on parent engagement. The parent engagement has always been a primary activity. And parents are always the first partners in learning. They've always should have been front and center in being partners in learning. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to step back and say, if our parents weren't engaged as our learning partners, what could we have been doing that we can be doing differently now? So rather than viewing parents as a substitute teacher, we need to be viewing parents as partners always along the way. We need to, again, listen. We know our parents are stressed out. I'm stressed out. I had a senior who just graduated with a B average, and I've never felt as stressed out about his education as I did in these last 2 months, and he's fine. So he'll tell you that I needed to just chill the heck out, Mom. But we know our parents are stressed out. I think we need to, again, really differentiate. A parent of a 4th grader is going to be very different than a parent who is dealing with 7 or 8 teachers that are texting them about different subjects. I had a really hard time navigating my high schoolers' teachers because I had many, many teachers. Your 4th grader who's getting texts and emails from special education, the reading specialist, their school principal, their classroom teachers. I think we have to be really aware of the different touch points that we have. So jumping back, I would say again, parents are always our first partners. They always should have been our first partners in learning. They're not substitute teachers, they're partners. But we also have to really think about the way that we engage parents and provide a cohesive opportunity in our engagement. So I think we can take it upon ourselves to say, if that parent is having 5 or 6 touch points with different teachers, what can we do to coordinate that effort in a way that that parent really sees themselves as a partner and not just getting hit with multiple requests from multiple places. I think that is one thing that we saw is lots of parents reporting that lots of people were reaching out with different expectations. And I think it's time to come together and really think about the way that we have a streamlined approach with that communication.
Great, thank you. Ron, yes, I see you agreeing over there.
Absolutely. Well, just to reinforce what Angie said, I mean, I think this crisis has shown and demonstrated more powerfully than anything that parents are more than just the first teacher, the proverbial brain builders and advocates and coach. They end up being the backstop and the backbone and the launch pad. And they are essential partners and critical partners. And I think, you know, what Angie's describing represents a great opportunity to seize this moment to build stronger and better partnerships between schools and parents. And specifically, I think, you know, looking at this concept of a warm handoff between schools and parents and home. And I think especially if we're concerned about preventing additional setbacks if schools are required to close again in the fall, perhaps getting ahead of that and beginning to plan intentionally for what that could look like, how that handoff might work, and starting now to ask parents about what they've learned about their kids and how their kids learn in the context of the remote learning that's been going on. And what would have made this transition that all of us experienced with so much chaos smoother or better should we have to do this again. And I just think, you know, any plans around reopening, addressing this learning loss recovery opportunity have to include parents as a central component of that for them to be successful.
I'm so engaged. I'm not thinking about my mute button. I'll stay with you for this next question, Ron, as it relates to creative solutions for communities. So what creative solutions should communities look to this summer to help mitigate learning loss? You know, with our Boys and Girls Clubs possibly being closed and all of those other usual outlets, what are some creative solutions that could occur inside our communities?
I think there's a lot that can be done to help ensure continuity of learning, and certainly ongoing supports for learning delivery and access through instructional materials, teachers, tutors, internet connectivity, devices, things like that. I'm hearing from communities that are really thinking creatively about how they might deploy college students who are well trained to serve as tutors, either online or in person. Knowing what we know about the research of structured, frequent tutoring by an adult who's well trained and equipped to be able to do that can play a very powerful role. We are seeing a lot of, hearing from a lot of communities that this also represents a great opportunity to expand partnerships between community-based organizations and schools to renegotiate perhaps with some of their vendors, as more and more folks are providing online platforms that are free and accessible during this time. And also an opportunity, and I just learned about recently, a clearinghouse that Common Sense Media has been involved in called wideopenschool.org, where a lot of this material that's being made available to folks hasn't been vetted, hasn't been looked at through a lens. And what this clearinghouse is designed to do is to really make sure that parents have a really good resource when they're thinking about what opportunities, and other partners in communities would have opportunities to really look through and make good choices and good decisions based on what's available. I also think there's just great potential in the space around homeschool communication and utilizing a broader array of resources to promote that communication and ensure that other support services like nutrition. We know even in a normal summer, only 1 in 7 kids who qualify for free and reduced meals have access to them during the summer months. I'm especially concerned about the issue of hunger, and I'm hearing a tremendous amount of creativity from communities using libraries, schools, other community partners, faith-based organizations to figure out how to deliver both food and nutrition, breakfast and lunch, and snacks for kids and meals during the summer, but also figuring out, in addition to delivering the food, how you might deliver learning experiences and activities that are wrapped around those meals that are just absolutely critical and essential right now.
Yes, thank you. Kevin and Lori, you spoke earlier a little bit about summer reading camps. So talk a bit about how those summer reading camps will really be impacted or can be modified, because we do know that we still need, as we talked about, some type of structured learning. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Lori and I have been working with the South Carolina Department of Education, and they've been building actually online activities for students to do over the summer for a summer reading camp experience. So they brought a team of folks together who would have been out in schools supporting teachers and principals and literacy coaches, and they kind of brought them together to design some lessons that could be provided during summer reading camp experiences. That's certainly been helpful. I think it'd be a great summer for a one book, one community effort as well, promoting some sort of one book, one community. I mean, think of all the different topics and themes that we're going through right now that would be really helpful for a whole community to discuss. So those are a couple of things that came to mind.
Right, and I think too, we've worked with some other states that similarly to South Carolina are exploring the opportunity to provide summer reading camp in an online kind of way. Obviously, it's just going to look a whole lot different than it has in the past, but our states are really, again, stepping up to ensure that districts have access to resources that they can use to conduct a summer reading camp if that's something they want to go forward with.
Okay, so with the potential of remote learning continuing at some point next year, What can districts do to prepare or train teachers, students, and their families on learning platforms, online programs, etc.? And what other types of training should be provided this summer, just in anticipation of whether we have to go full remote or hybrid? Anji, you may take this. I see you unmuting yourself.
So let me lay some context, and I'll just speak from our experiences in Colorado. Last year, our legislature passed a mandate that all teachers in our state go through a K-3 teacher training that needed to be completed by those teachers by fall of 2021. So we were in the midst of planning that, and then COVID hit, which really forced us to do a 180-degree rethink about the way that we provided that instruction. So one of several considerations that we've made is really re-looking at that and not just taking a traditional approach to a novel problem. So, and by that I mean, when I think about the instinct to just say, well, let's just take this training and have it be virtual or do it through Zoom, we have to really think about the way that that training is teaching our teachers. So for example, the training videos that we have were about providing instruction for teacher-led instruction that looked like a teacher in front of 5 to 10 students. We need to reimagine the types of videos, the experience, and the learning. So it wasn't just taking the platform and saying, well, we'll just adapt for the teachers, assuming that eventually they'll be in front of 10 kids again. We really have to reimagine the experiences that they're going to be having as teachers so that it's relevant to their time. Now we think, well, what does it look like for a teacher to be teaching maybe 3 kids face-to-face and 4 kids that are on a video screen in a different, like we have to really reimagine that. We also have to be really realistic about meeting students where they're at. We've always talked about differentiated learning. It's differentiation for skill level, but also access level. So now we're thinking you're differentiating not only for students who are all over the, maybe all over the chart as far as where their skill levels are, but they're also approaching you in different places. So you're dealing with a little bit of a Rubik's Cube in the way that things are turning. Like I'm dealing with different types of instruction and different types of access and different types of engagement. And we have to think about the way that we reach our teachers and meet them in that way. So I would just go back to, we can't approach this with thinking that we're going to use our traditional thinking with a novel problem. We have to really be aware of all of the implications and what that means. So, I can leave it at that. I can say that we're still struggling with it. I wish I had a really great, this is the way that we're doing it with it and what we're doing, but it's a challenge. It's a challenge to be thinking through all of those things and to be pulling back the layers and saying, is this the type of instruction that our teachers are really going to be providing when they go to use this training, and being really relevant in that way.
Kevin, did you want to add a little bit to that?
Sure. Just from what I've heard from a couple of districts that I've worked with, in some cases, and from parents and from you all even, districts and schools are using a lot of different online platforms. They may want to consider consolidating down to just one to support across the district. It's really hard for parents, for students, for educators to think about all the different platforms that are out there and the nuances of those platforms they may need to use. And that if a district can select one platform that they're going to use and all teachers, students, educators are using the same one, and the district can provide really solid support and comprehensive training on that platform for how to align what they're doing there. I just think from the conversations I've had with districts, that may be an approach that would be beneficial for them to consider at least.
Okay. All right. So now let's shift to fall, unless Ron, you wanted to share something.
Just really quick. I mean, I think, in the near term follow on, we saw a lot of attention focused on devices and connectivity and real urgent needs around that. And now I see and hear a lot more communities talking about the level of depth around engagement. And I think there's a real opportunity for focused exploration about what student engagement really looks like in this new reality that Anji, I think, described so powerfully. And then I also think there may be some opportunities to incentivize and strengthen the kind of collaboration that we see in a lot of community schools models, where health and social services can come together in the context of schools, where parent support can be facilitated. And, you know, especially in this time where facility space is going to be an issue with physical distancing requirements, with the split schedules that many districts are thinking about and considering. I think community partners are going to be absolutely essential to help schools and districts manage what is going to be a really challenging reopening to the school year this fall, regardless of, you know, how much that is remote versus in person, and where different communities and different states come down in that.
Thank you. All right. So as we anticipate a fall reopening, we know that as it stands, our governors will give guidance and be in charge of when or if we will be able to send children back to our traditional brick and mortar schools. The CDC, of course, has also issued guidance, but this stood out to me about the implementation should be guided by what is feasible, practical, acceptable, and tailored to the needs of each community. So we do have to take all of those things into consideration. I know in Mississippi, we do have some districts that have one school. It may be a K-12 school. So how do you do that? You know, so there are things that are going to have to be considered as it relates to on the ground decisions that have to be made. So let's think of some fall strategies. Okay, so what are some things that we can actually do? We have a lot of educators on the line or state agency supports. So what can we do as we brace for the beginning of year knowledge gap? Because really almost all kids, as we've stated, are going to need some type of support. What can teachers do to establish baseline data and to identify students who need intervention without having spring student outcome data? A lot of times we use that, or we use the beginning of screener data. And specifically, what additional supports will our fourth grade teachers need to provide interventions? So Lori, I want to start with you.
Okay. We had a scenario here in Florida a number of years ago where this kind of situation developed only because of a different reason. And the scenario was that we were changing assessments, moved from one state assessment to another. And it has always been, ever since our third grade reading law has come into effect, that third grade data was released first, because we knew that districts had to make decisions regarding students in summer reading camp and so forth. Well, this particular year, it was very unclear whether or not that districts would receive that data in a timely manner. So in essence, they had to make some decisions regarding students for summer reading camp and who might be scheduled to be retained, etc., without that data. And they were really panicked in the beginning. But then again, as we stopped and took a breath, we encouraged them, use the data you have and formulate your list of students that you think would benefit from summer reading camp that may not be fully prepared for fourth grade. And then, you know, hopefully you'll receive your state level data, but if you don't, work from that list. Well, it ended up that they did indeed receive that state level data, but they had already prepared their list. And what was beautiful about that whole experience was that the lists in essence matched. So the state level data and the list of students that was generated from that that needed additional support matched almost exactly with the list that the districts had formulated on their own without that data. So again, we know who these kids are. We can use the data that we have, and then certainly we could administer a screener as soon as school begins to give us an even better idea of you know, the kind of perhaps loss that we might have experienced due to this situation and then through the summer. And so I think that we have the data to make some good decisions. And then I think it's really important for our fourth grade teachers, again, that there's a communication there between third grade and fourth grade teachers in particular, in regard to individual students and what the needs of those students are, what the strengths of those students are, and how those students might be supported. And that's going to be really, really important to our fourth grade teachers moving forward, along with perhaps some help in conducting instruction related to foundational reading skills. So that communication's going to be really important. I've even heard it suggested that perhaps some districts or schools might want to really consider looping teachers this year. And that might be helpful because those third grade teachers already know those students. And so you don't have to invest the time in gathering and communicating data, and that you can start right in with instruction. There are some things that we can certainly do to establish that baseline data and to meet students where they are, because that's going to be really important, and move forward with them.
Okay, Angie, I know with most states that do have third grade or comprehensive third grade policies, there is a requirement for a beginning of year screener. And so what role do you think that will play now in not just kindergarten through third grade, but maybe those upper elementary grades, or maybe even into middle school, to begin to establish some type of baseline data point or points for our students?
First, I want to say I really appreciate what Lori offered in those suggestions. I think they're really valuable, and I would definitely, champion those. I think those are great ideas. One of the unique things about being in a state role is that we're really guided by our statute. I think that policymakers are really going to have to look at the statutes that are in place for their K-3 reading. In Colorado, while I can't advocate for policy changes, I can say that funding stops at third grade for children that are identified as having a significant reading deficiency. In Colorado, funds are attached specifically to each child that is identified with a significant reading deficiency. And once that child moves on into fourth grade, funding no longer is an opportunity for that child. That's always been an issue for teachers as they think about continuing with reading plans for children that move into fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. I think now it would take a statutory change for us to continue to offer support. I think for those of you who are in states that are similar with K-3 reading policies, those policies really may need to be reflected upon to determine whether or not there's a transition year or funding supports that move forward. This can impact whether or not a district has the opportunity to offer assessments or benchmark data for children in fourth, fifth, and sixth, or intervention supports, or the support of an intervention teacher, because funding may be attached to that child. So I know that that's something that we are really questioning right now and looking to our policymakers to really be thinking through. In absence of that, we've been really successful. I have to say that Colorado is unique again in that we have 7 assessment vendors who districts can select from to determine which assessment they want to use to identify a student with a significant reading deficiency. We've really had to rely on those vendors because, with 7 different assessments, it's difficult to go back in and say, you're going to do any one thing. But we have been really pleased with our vendors that have been willing to just say, this is how you're going to do it. This is what it looks like for this particular assessment. And we've got a whole host of guidance for you. I won't say which vendor, but I've been really excited with some of the work that they've just done naturally and really providing support to the field and assuring that teachers know exactly how to come back in and do benchmark data for beginning of the year, how to interpret data, where to go. They've provided a really great roadmap. And I know many of our vendors are doing that. So as a state, while I don't provide overall guidance, really relying on that opportunity for vendors to interact and really step up and support support their teachers and their customers.
Ron, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just really quickly, I think it ties to both what Angie said and also going back to Laurie. I think those rapid cycle diagnostics or screeners, in addition to touching back with the third grade teachers, should also touch down with the parents, and it gives us a concrete and specific opportunity to engage parents to smooth that transition, you know, for fourth graders. And then the other bit of context, you know, of what we're actually bracing for, I'm particularly concerned by the round of emergency cuts in education spending that we're hearing from governors across the country, and in response to the decline, really precipitous decline in tax revenues. And so I think it's fair to say that we're not only bracing for the substantive challenge that we face, but we're also going to need to brace for a challenge around doing a lot more and a lot differently with a lot less, potentially, in terms of resources. So I think how CARES Act funding is utilized at the state level, how districts are thinking about resource allocations, and superintendents at every level really wrestling with some really tough fiscal challenges right now.
Yes, indeed. And I really appreciate Angie bringing up the policymakers and their roles, and reconsidering some of the things that we've already put into statute. And as you all know, many of the sessions were just abruptly ended this year, and they may have come back literally just to close the session out without any additional conversations. We had made a lot of headway with some states with our early literacy platform and those things, and now those things have really come to a halt. So we're hoping to regain that momentum now that we have this disruption to learning across the state. So I'll come back to you for a minute, Angie. You mentioned the importance of the vendors and what they've done with assessments in Colorado. So now we have to also think about instructional materials, and Colorado has had national attention lately about your process, your very thorough process in identifying high quality instructional materials. So can a curriculum as it is currently organized, as is, we kind of spoke to professional development now having to be modified, can a curriculum really just be used for remote learning, or should our vendors really consider an online alternative that is designed specifically for remote instruction? Do you think they're kind of busy right now doing those things?
You know, Colorado did just go through a pretty extensive review of curricula, and we reviewed over 139 vendor submitted programs, core, supplemental, and intervention programs. When we established our rubric to review those programs, what we didn't know we should have incorporated was an opportunity for vendors to tell us how they would provide online learning and instruction, because we didn't think that we were going to be in a global pandemic. And my team would have thought I was crazy if I would have said, we're going to be in a global pandemic, so we better add this to the rubric. But we didn't. In retrospect, and for states that may be thinking about doing the same thing, I would really encourage, really thinking about how we evaluate an online instructional program. Again, because I would expect that that instructional program isn't just taking their existing program and throwing it online, that they really are adapting and modifying for the, the variables of online instruction. We didn't do that because we didn't think that we could. And so now our districts have a list of approved programs, but all of those approved programs, for the most part, are programs that were meant to be delivered with face-to-face instruction. So, we're not going to have a chance to go back. What we're going to need to do is go back and engage the vendors to say, what are you offering? How does this look for a child that is being taught in a remote environment? Or, maybe what are your engagement practices? Because your engagement has to be more than just, multiple puppets or books or different things. Your engagement practice has to be really different when you're engaging a child, on a video screen than it does when you're trying to keep them engaged face-to-face. So I would highly, for those who are on the call that work in state agencies that are thinking about the same type of review, I would say be sure that you're thinking about the multiple methods of delivery when you're thinking about reviewing those programs, and maybe teaming up as a group of states to say who are the best providers of multiple method delivery and what would we be looking for. So something that we've learned that I think that would just be really helpful to have as a maybe a consortium or an opportunity to really reflect on that.
That's a great idea. Kevin?
I just want to follow up, but a couple of the researchers that I work with have noted that it's important for the core curricular materials to align well with intervention, because if students are taught in intervention techniques that are very different than core curriculum, they can get confused. So we know that more students are going to need intervention in the coming years than probably we've seen before. So it's going to be even more important to consider, how does this intervention material align with what's going on in core instruction? And if the interventionist is not the teacher, and Lori talked about communication important before, it's important that they talk and they say, okay, the student's progressing here, they're having challenges with this is how I'm doing this in intervention. So it's just really important to think about how that core instruction might align with the separate intervention materials.
You're exactly right. There are many cases where, or in which the interventionist comes to the classroom to get the child or to get the small group. They go off, then they come back, and there's no communication. There's, nothing that is, like you said, a handoff between the teacher and also the interventionist to track progress or to even talk about other things like behaviors or how those things may be impacting the learning. So you're exactly right. That communication is going to be key as well. Angie?
Yeah, can I add to that? I also want to impart the importance of saying that goes back to summer learning. Your summer learning in Colorado, we know that our summer learning has to be attached to the program that was being provided in the school during the school year. It isn't as effective for a summer learning program to be created and implemented outside or in a silo from the existing educational program. And so when we talk about summer learning, we have to talk about attached learning, about cohesive and aligned learning that's aligned to the instructional program being utilized in the educational system and those intervention programs. So it all has to line up, whereas often our districts will create a summer learning program sort of in a box of its own, with its own teachers and its own systems, without actually aligning all of the instructional systems. So I just want to impart the importance of that. And really making sure that summer learning programs are cohesive and consistent for students.
Thank you. Okay, well, this is going to be our last question of the day. There are other things that I believe are just conversations for a later time. I'm very interested in having those conversations, especially as it relates to the parental support that's needed for our youngest learners, our beginning readers for kindergarten and first grade. And, parents actually have to be there. For my middle school child heading to high school, she was able to just log on into the platform and she knew what she needed to do. But if you're thinking about phonological awareness or phonics or those activities that require the teacher to engage with the child, but also the child to have some support in a remote learning environment, then we really have to think about some ways in which we can support parents in doing that. But that's a conversation for a later date. Okay, so there will be a need for ensuring solid communication strategies. Laura, you spoke to this before, between parents and the third grade teacher and the fourth grade teacher when school begins, especially if this remote learning is going to continue into the fall. So what specific information should be shared among them, and how can this be done effectively? I believe North Carolina, they're looking at the third grade teacher really handing off kind of a portfolio of student learning, but also feedback as it relates to their academic progress, where they ended, and also that behavior and social emotional learning. So last question of the day, and I'll have each of you to respond. What should be shared among the teachers and the parent, and how can it be done effectively? And I will start with Ron.
So I think starting with this concept of a warm handoff and how do you build a relationship between parents and teachers, I think is absolutely critical. And it seems to me that parents have learned a whole lot about their kids during this emergency, and it would be a great starting point in that conversation to find out what some of those things are that parents have learned about their kids and engage them in that early screening and diagnostic that we talked about earlier, and asking the question specifically about what would have made this transition a smoother or a better one. And then I think there's a range of probably supports that need to be paid specific attention to. Like I'm thinking about supports for immigrant, refugee, non-English speaking families, the social emotional support, and how to manage stress and social interaction and building some of those informal networks between and among parents. And then I think there's probably a need for building stronger connections to social services and help around income, housing, food security, things like that, that I think in a broader community role that folks like from the United Way and other community partners can come alongside the work that schools are doing to build those relationships with parents around the core academic instruction. I think these kinds of partnerships really reinforce the point that schools are there for kids and for families and for parents, and that school becomes a hub and a place where resources are brokered that can really help and support parents who are really struggling right now and being asked to carry a pretty heavy load. So those are just a few thoughts just to kind of kick off the answers to this portion of the agenda.
Okay, Kevin?
Yeah, I agree with Ron completely. And I know we've talked a little bit about that handoff and ensuring that there's a good plan in place between last year's teacher, whatever happens over the summer, parent, and next year's teacher. School counselors will need to be involved with that, the RTI, MTSS team, administrators. It'll also be important to share information and data on how students perform both before and after school is closed. There's some good questions, and I really like the idea of North Carolina's portfolio. There's some really good questions that can be asked. How did students perform online? I don't think we're going to get away from some kind of blended instruction for a long time now. I think that's going to be part of what we see from here on out. So not all students performed well, or initially at least. So what kind of supports did they need? How involved were the parents in that process? We already know all the memes and social media piece, but how involved were the parents with that process? How self-motivated are students? What's their self-efficacy? Do they think they can do the work, or do they struggle or just not know where to turn? And then how much teacher communication was needed to ensure student success? So I think that there's some questions that districts and states and schools could come up with to ask the educators, parents, and students, because those questions should be asked to the students too, not just the parents, not just the educators, but the students themselves. What makes you perform better online? And I think, like I said, coming up with a set of questions that could be asked to all those groups might be really beneficial data to collect.
I wonder which agency can come up with a survey like that.
Not the top leader.
Great. Okay, Lori, final thoughts?
I think, again, Ron and Kevin has really shared some important things in regarding, that relationship building and how important that is between, especially now, between our families and our teachers in this situation we find ourselves in. I read recently an article that said that schools should be more family friendly and families should be more school friendly. And I think there's some truth to that. And I think a lot of it has to do with, again, those positive interactions between schools and families. And I think that those interactions need to be consistent and regular. And so and I'm afraid the onus has to be, for the most part, on the teacher, that the teacher has to exhibit leadership and reach out to those parents. And even though she or he may not hear from those families, to keep trying and establish that relationship between themselves and their families. And just knowing that we're there ultimately to serve students, and all of us want the best for our students, and we know that we've all been through a pretty traumatic kind of situation. So everybody is struggling to figure out exactly what things will look like and feel like and so forth. And so I think that just ongoing, consistent communication that may have to very well be teacher initiated. But I think Kevin's question in regard to how much communication, how often, we don't know the answers, to that question, to those questions. And so finding out really looking to our educators in our district to see how they did handle this and what kinds of things were successful and where do we need to improve. And so even though it seems like we're still running, or as a good friend, we're dancing away here, we still need to take a moment to reflect on what we've done so far, and as we move into a new school year, what we can do better.
All right, so Angie, you will close us out today. Final thoughts.
Well, that's a big order. I just want to
No pressure.
I want to give a shout out to myself and all the other early childhood folks that have always had really solid transition plans, that we've really focused on that so much throughout the years to assure that transitions are a really critical part of what we do. And the team that I'm working with right now is working on a transition toolkit, and we're working with the National Preschool through Third Grade Center to put together a Colorado Colorado-based toolkit using our preschool development funds. We've been lucky in working with the National P3 Center to be thinking about not just transitions from preschool to K, but how transitions work across the P3 continuum. So I encourage us all to reach out to our folks in the state that really have been working on transitions and supports, and engage what are some of the positive practices that have been working, because they can work in the older grades. I just, again, want to share some gratitude for being here and for engaging in this conversation, and saying that none of us thought we would be having this conversation in December. None of us, thought the words global pandemic made us feel anything other than just a little weird when we said it out loud. But we're here and we're working really hard to adapt and strategize, and our parents are in a novel situation. Our teachers, our school leaders, our superintendents, our providers, everyone is kind of working in a different situation. So giving ourselves some grace. We've always in our office have said, give grace, give ourselves some opportunity to really think about where we are and what we're doing, and standing back and taking a breath and realizing that this is different and we can rise to the challenge. We have an opportunity here to make an impact in a different way. So thank you.
Thank you. All of the things that you've shared today will be very, very helpful to the attendees here. And of course, we will begin sharing this widely once we're done the recording. I really appreciate all of the, the charge to our policymakers, the charge to our governor's offices as it relates to funding, all the charges to our school districts, our teachers, and our parents, because we are all in this together. Although we've been social distancing, we know that we need each other. And so as a result of all of the things that you said today, we'll make sure that we are also championing the message that with our possibilities of reopening or not, that we still need to focus on learning, and we still need to prepare our children. And there are ways that we can begin to build these networks so that one person doesn't feel like he or she is doing it all alone, and that we can, continue to support each other in this journey. And as Angie stated, that, just unforeseen, that we would have never known that we were here. But I really appreciate each of you for joining me today. And when I made the call, you just said yes right away. So I really appreciate you guys. If any of you would like to contact the panelists directly, their email addresses or contact information is included on this slide. And thank you again. And this concludes our webinar on COVID-19 and the learning loss and what our states, communities, and districts can do. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.